So I wanted to dedicate this class, Le'iloi Nishnas, my father, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda ben Reuven, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda ben Mincha Fega, whose yahrzeit is tonight. Tomorrow, I'd like to share something, it's a custom on a yahrzeit. The verse says, V'hachai yitein el libo, and the living take to heart, which means that we, as the living, think of the legacy of the person who departed, and we share that legacy. We talk about it, we focus on it, and we take inspiration. So I want to share just one vignette from my father. My father, of course, in my eyes, was a very, very special chassid, special follower of the Rebbe, very devoted Jew, very devoted to God, very devoted to Chassidus, very devoted to the Rebbe. I'll share two stories because I don't know what to share. I've probably shared them both before because I guess this is what comes to my mind, which are the ones that are especially meaningful to me. One, in terms of my father as a Jew, my father was sick for many years. He had Diana Machla, and he actually lived for 14 years with leukemia. And the usual life expectancy is 7. So that was probably a big large blessings of the Rebbe that gave him those extra 7 years of his life. So towards the end, those last 7 years, he was in and out of the hospital a lot, especially the last 3 years. So at one point, he was in the hospital. He had just been admitted. He was in his hospital room in his hospital gown. And he knew that tonight was the night to sanctify the new moon. Now, you can't sanctify the new moon from indoors. You have to be outside. Well, what's he supposed to do? You have to do it at night. He couldn't have done it before. Even if he gets out tomorrow, he doesn't know when he's going to get out, but no, it's tonight. So he decided he was going to have to leave the hospital. Of course, if you're a patient, you can't just walk out. So he sort of got back into his regular clothing, snuck out of his room, snuck out of the ward, went down the elevator, went outside, said the prayer of sanctification of the new moon, and went back in, went up the elevator, went back into his ward, went into his room, put on his hospital gown, got into bed, probably very exhausted, but it's the night you're supposed to sanctify the new moon. So obviously that's what you have to do. And that was just, I could say many stories along those lines, just very dedicated, very focused. This is what's God's will. Many people aren't even careful to do this in the first place. This is God's will. This is when we have to do it. This is how we have to do it. We do it. We just do it. So my father was a scientist. He worked for the Defense Department. He worked for the only laboratory in the Pentagon that was actually named after a Jew, at least originally when my father started working. It was called the Harry Diamond Laboratory. Afterwards, they changed the names of the laboratory, so it lost the name of that famous Jewish scientist. And the laboratory was achieving a very big milestone. They had created 1,000 patents, meaning there's a laboratory. They invent things for the Army, for the Defense Department. And each time you have an invention, you get a patent. And they were making a big ceremony. They knew they were getting close, getting close. And at this big ceremony, which I remember I attended, so it was not just the staff, but their spouses, their families. It was this big gala event because this was such a huge deal for a laboratory to produce 1,000 patents. That means 1,000 inventions for the Army. So it was a big deal on many, many levels. And they, drum roll, please, called up the person that had received patent 997. Could have been anyone, so to speak. You could have produced 20 patents, but you just weren't in that number. So it's, as we say it, the hand of God. 998, 999. And now they're calling up the 1,000th patent, the one that broke this record and achieved this milestone. And with the hand of God, that patent was created by my father. Not that he timed it that way, of course, but God timed it. When he went up on the stage in front of everyone to receive this patent, he put on his kapata. He put on his garment of a chassid, his garment of a religious Jew. He obviously didn't go to work in a kapata. He went to work in a suit and tie. But when he was going up on stage to receive this honor, he wanted to go on stage as a Jew. Obviously, he looked like a Jew anyway. He had a beard. He had his tzitzis, the fringes hanging out. No, he was going up with a kapata. And I remember very clearly, he went up with a kapata, and it made a tremendous impression. I remember someone else, after my father passed away, sharing with my mother, a Jew who worked in the laboratory, what he was not a chassid. I don't know if he was or wasn't religious. Perhaps he was, perhaps he wasn't. But what pride it gave him that for the patent number 1,000, it went to Dr. Berg, who went up as a Jew. So I think that's a story worth remembering, just in terms of our lives and who we represent and how we represent, and that pride and that sense of representing God and making sure we do so full colors to the best of our ability. So those were 2 short vignettes, 2 short stories from my father, whose yahrzeit is tonight and tomorrow. And I share them that it should be an aliyah, to be an elevation for his soul. So we are going to keep going in Tanya. As I said, we definitely plan on completing the introduction today. So we are up to the fourth and final section of this letter. If we remember, this was the letter that the Alter Rebbe sent while the Tanya was being printed. It took a while. It was not an easy road in Tsarist Russia to print a Jewish work. And many miracles were involved in enabling them to get the permits and print the Tanya. And as was happening, the followers of the Alter Rebbe were feeling like resistant. Okay, when it's these handwritten manuscripts, it doesn't feel as real or formalized or official. There's still that same bond between me and the Rebbe, and there's these amazing manuscripts that we're learning and loving. But it's still not like a book. Now it's becoming a book. Now it seems like a very tangible barrier, thing, substance. I've got the Rebbe, but in between me and the Rebbe of mine, I have this book. And the Rebbe, responding to their fears, is writing this letter in which he elaborates and explains how right they are. How is it possible that a book could work for everyone? And it says, but it does. Because I know you so well. Because I love you so much. I understand you. And we did the impossible, so to speak. We put all the answers to all the questions that anytime you ever have an issue in serving God, you will find your answer in this book. So we're now up to the final section, the last paragraph, where the Rebbe is briefly explaining why he's printing this, which he held off on doing, and what he wants as a takeaway in terms of how this book should be respected. So we're on the last section of this letter, the introduction of, as Alter Rebbe calls it, not the author, the compiler of Tanya. So, sort of explaining, and why am I printing this? We had this sort of nice system going on where I would orally give over the chapters, and the scribes would write, and then they'd be copied, and they'd be copied, and they'd be copied, and it wasn't such a barrier because it wasn't a book. Why am I making a book? Well, over time, as I explained last week, as copies were made, inadvertent errors crept in. And those inadvertent errors then spread because they were copied, and they were copied, and they were copied. So just sort of due to the natural course of things, errors slipped into the Tanya, which wasn't as critical and devastating, and for that alone, the Tanya would definitely not have been printed. But additionally, those that opposed the movement of Hasidus, the movement of Chabad, Hasidim, the Alter Rebbe, they used this as a golden opportunity to insert deliberate errors to discredit the Alter Rebbe, to discredit Hasidus, and then they spread and spread and spread and spread many, many copies, even printed their version to really, really discredit and uproot this fledgling young movement. So the Alter Rebbe said, okay, now this is going too far. Now I got to put a stop to this. Now we got to print it. And again, the Alter Rebbe, as we said, was very resistant to printing it because he understood the enormous godliness he invested in the Tanya. His contemporary and mechutzin and close friend, Rebbe Levi Yitzchak of Raditchev, when he saw the Tanya, he said, wow, such a great God that he put in such a small book. This was an amazing godly feat, way beyond anything done by the Maggid, way beyond anything done by the Baal Shem Tov. That's why he had to sit in prison 53 days for 53 chapters, because he's really spilling the beans here and really making God so accessible in all of his secrets. So to put it down to the level of being printed? Like, whoa, can't make it that physical. We got to at least a little bit hold it afloat from physicality. Like, let's just hover over planet Earth a little bit, which of course to a certain degree we still have because there are no nakudos in the Tanya. There are no vowels. To make it a little bit not on planet Earth. No punctuation marks, basically, for the same reason. But printing, do we have to do this? The Misnagdim forced the Alter Rebbe's hand, and he knew he had to. Of course, we, as the recipients of this, are very grateful to those Misnagdim, because, so to speak, only through them, the Alter Rebbe agreed to print the Tanya, and who knows, eventually it would have been printed, maybe it would have been a few generations later, would there have been nobody that would have been able to filter out all the mistakes. This is printed in the times of the Alter Rebbe, under the Alter Rebbe's jurisdiction. This is legit. This is real deal, the Alter Rebbe's Tanya. So we're very grateful to those Misnagdim. Their intention might not have been good, but they did us a tremendous favor because we got the Tanya in a form that it is lasting and substantial. The same reason the Alter Rebbe didn't want to print it, to get it such a physical way in the world, exactly where we are so grateful that these enemies and opponents did what they did, because the result is we got the Tanya printed. And of course, that's true in life in general. You know, God runs the world. So when we see seemingly the negative side is gaining ground, is winning, has the upper hand, just keep in mind, it's just like the printing of the Tanya. It's always just like the printing of the Tanya. You know, not at all exonerating anything that happened up October 7th, but very clearly, in a very practical military fashion, October 7th is what caused the fall of Syria, ultimately. October 7th is what enabled the 12-day war and destruction of Iran's ability to make a nuclear bomb. So doesn't have to go that way. And God, you could have found a much easier, better, positive, happy way to do it. But whenever we see evil seems to be gaining power, no, there's a long-term strategy here. Just like these enemies did something so horrible, deliberately inserting errors to not just denigrate, to discredit the Alter Rebbe and Hasidus. And thank you, we got the Tanya printed. All right, so continuing. Hine, al yedei, now we're turning the page. Al yedei ribu ha'atakos, through the many copies, shonos, of all these different copies, meaning with all these different, weird, strange, deliberate, and accidental errors. There's so many mistakes now. Again, you got the accidental ones, you got the deliberate ones, you got all the innocent people copying the accidental ones. You have the innocent people copying the deliberate ones. So you've just got, they're just exponentially, it's spreading and spreading and spreading. Ulazos, and to this, to save this situation, once the Alter Rebbe gave the green light and said, okay, we're going to print it, it was still an enormous job. It was an enormous job at many levels. They had to gather all these handwritten manuscripts, sift through them, figure out what the mistakes were, figure out what was the accurate version, and then go through all the bureaucratic loopholes and hoops and briberies and briberies and briberies, everything they had to do to get the government to give them permission to print a Jewish work. In the end, there was a whole story, a whole miracle story, how they actually got that ultimate permission to print the Tanya. So very, very, very not simple. And therefore the Rebbe says, and to this generously donated the spirit of these very, very special people, very noble people, that are named on another page, not on this page, to work really hard with their bodies, with all their resources, to bring these above mentioned pamphlets to the printing house. Clean from any blemish, from any copy error. Meaning it wasn't only, as I'm saying, governmental blockages. First, we have to ascertain what is the right version. In other words, we have to look at all the handwritten manuscripts. We have to figure out what's the mistake. We have to come up with the correct one and then lay that out and print it. So on many levels, this was an enormous, enormous job. And these special people were the ones that did it, right? As we've learned there about them earlier in the Tanya, that they really put themselves all into this tremendous project, not for their personal benefit, for the benefit literally of the Jewish people forever. Clean from any errors, any copy errors, edited very well. We got the real version here. And you say to a good job, Yasher Koyach. So the Rebbe is saying, Yasher Koyach, thank you, thank you, thank you for the Tanya. Thank you for doing this, which is amazing if you can imagine that the Alter Rebbe is not only saying this, he's literally writing this. It's literally printed as part of the Tanya. The Alter Rebbe's thanks to the people, the printers that worked so hard for the Tanya to be printed. So now that we have this Tanya, of course, the Alter Rebbe understands that it's once we overcome our initial resistance because of the spiritual dimension, but okay, we have no choice. God's pushing our hands. We're going to do it. But there's also a pragmatic concern. The pragmatic concern is, now that we have this all laid out so beautifully, now we have all these permits in place. If someone wants to discredit the movement, it's actually even easier than it ever was before. Because before, they had to take the handwritten manuscripts, and they had to copy them by hand, and they had to insert deliberate errors into it, and then they had to hope those get copied, or they had to make by hand many, 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 many more copies, and it was this whole laborious job, which they did. But imagine, now the Tanya is printed. If they want to mess us up, it's easier than it ever was before. All they need to do is insert errors within the printing press version and then print those books. And then it'll be so easy, so fast, so efficient and user-friendly. And they could promulgate misinformation and discrediting of the Tanya, of Hasidus, of the Alter Rebbe so quickly. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe puts now a strong warning and blessing, depending on which road you're going to take, of anyone that's thinking of copying the Tanya to the exclusion of the original printers. And the Alter Rebbe places a 5-year ban on this. And this 5-year ban has been reissued again and again and again, because every time you reprint the Tanya, the ban goes into effect one more time. So until today, this 5-year ban is effective. Again, with this mindset of, we don't want anyone who's not the official printers to print it, because we don't know what they might end up printing. And the Alter Rebbe is giving strong warnings, curses, if anyone would dare do it, and strong blessings for people that are going to respect this. And since the verse says this complete statement, Arur Masig Gvul Re'ehu, cursed is the one who moves back the boundary of his friend. What is this talking about? Well, this is a commandment. The commandment is called Hasagas Gvul. Hasagas Gvul is, don't step on my territory. Literally in the farmland, if you can envision it, if you have 2 farms next to each other and you're pushing back, pushing forward, you're pushing the boundary, so you are overtaking the farmland of your neighbor. You are stepping on his territory in the most literal way. That is a transgression. You literally pushed your fence back, and then you encroached on his property and have however many more yards or feet or miles of land now that you took. It's now fenced in by you. That is the most biblical expression of Hasagas Gvul, stepping on someone else's territory. But stepping on someone else's territory is not only relevant to 2 farmers in Israel. Stepping on someone's territory applies in myriads of situations. If there's only 1 shoemaker in your town, and actually your town can only support 1 shoemaker because you don't have enough people on shoes needed to support 2, then if someone opens up a new shoe store, a shoemaking store, they are transgressing Hasagas Gvul. They are stepping on someone else's territory with the shoes. they are stepping on someone else's territory, because in this town, you really can't support two shoemakers. Now, of course, sometimes maybe the person who says you can't is wrong and there's really enough people. And obviously, if this actually came to a court situation, they would have to literally see how many people are there and what's the demand, and maybe we can support two. Now, there's an interesting story with the Rebbe that going back probably to like the 50s, there was one kosher grocery store in Crown Heights. One. And that person barely made a living. and that person was not Chabad. And another man, a Lubavitcher, Chabad person, decided he also wanted to open up a kosher grocery store. And the first grocer said, you can't open it up. I'm barely surviving. You know, we work from like the crack of dawn, delivering groceries till late at night, and we're barely making it. There's not enough clients, there's not enough revenue for two kosher grocery stores in this neighborhood. So you can't open up. It's hasagas gvul. And I don't remember the details. The man said, please, 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 please. I don't remember how it came to this. But the original grocer, who was not Chabad, said, okay, he will go with that other man to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Now he knows he's not Chabad and the other person is, but he's trusting the Rebbe. He says, if the Lubavitcher Rebbe says there's enough business for both of us, no problem with my blessings. And if the Lubavitcher Rebbe doesn't say that, no way. You cannot do this because I'm barely making it as it is. And the two of them went for a private audience and they both explained their positions. And the Rebbe said to the first grocer, you're actually right. There really isn't enough revenue. There aren't enough people. There aren't enough shoppers. There's enough money coming in. There's enough revenue for two grocers. But God will make it work. And you'll both earn a good living. That was the Rebbe's verdict. The two men walked out, totally satisfied. And the original grocer even gave this competitor who was opening up like down the block from him a loan of money, like about $500, which was astronomical in those days, to start stocking up his grocery. And they both worked hard, and thank God they both made a living. But the contention, the original contention, how one person can tell another person, no, you're not allowed to do your business. What do you mean? It's a free country, right? That's what we say in America. It's a free country. I can do whatever I want. Not according to God's laws, because it's hasagas gvul. The only area where we're told there is no hasagas gvul, no encroaching someone else's territory, is actually in education. Doesn't make a difference how few kids are in town. Yeah, you've got 10 kids and you got a school. You could open up a second school. You could open up a third school, because we're told competition is a good thing, right? If there's all these different schools competing for the same small pool of students, they're all going to have to do a better job, and that's good. The kids will get a better education in the end. So in education, there is no concept of hasaga school, gvul, stepping on someone else's territory. But in everything else, there is. So why does the Rebbe bring this in? Because the Rebbe is saying the verse in talking about the prohibition of encroaching on someone's property uses a very, very strong word, an incredibly strong word. The verse says aror. Aror means cursed. That's a big deal. As the Rebbe explains, the aror bo klola bo nidoy chas v'shalom v'chulei. And aror has two concepts. Aror means a curse, and aror means nidoy. Nidoy might not be a term that you're familiar with, but maybe some of you have heard the term cherem. Cherem, which we translate loosely as excommunication. Cherem is a very, very severe situation where a person is sort of shunned, separated because of wrong things they've done, sometimes until they repent, until they stop, until they confess, until they make amends, or sometimes not, depending on the situation. So nidoy is a lesser level of cherem. It's not full-blown, as we say, excommunication, but it is partially. So the Alter Rebbe says, hello? Again, remembering, he understands. He just printed this. For all those haters out there, it's even easier now to mess him up. So we got to be really strong here and really put the fear of God in them. So he says, if you would step on someone else's territory, now whose territory are we talking about? We're talking about the territory, in this case, of the printers. Meaning these men, these wonderful, beautiful men, these two men they were, who dedicated their money, their resources, their time, their energies, their bodies to printing the Tanya. If anyone else would infringe on their copyright, as we would say it today, if anyone else would take this Tanya that they worked so hard and they cleaned up all the mistakes and they laid it out and they got the government permits and everyone's just going to like, oh, hey, now I can print it. You are stepping on their territory. 100%. Of course, today we know there's many very high level cases of what we call intellectual property, right? Copywriting intellectual property. So copyright issues are definitely well understood in America for sure. This is a Ramasa Gvul Re'ehu. This is stepping on someone else's territory. It's a farmer pushing back the fence, and it's someone stealing intellectual property. So you are stepping on the territory of these two wonderful, wonderful, noble men, these two printers. Now, again, it's not that the Alter Rebbe doesn't care about the printers and all their efforts and all their investment, but it's much bigger than that. It's not only, well, I want to protect these two people that worked so hard and dedicated themselves so selflessly. I don't want them to have worked so hard and then someone else just runs with their product and gets all the profits. It's much deeper than that. Again, because the fear is if those that want to discredit now could print a discredited version, taking their version and distorting it in critical places, who knows what could happen. So that's why the Alter Rebbe is very strong here. This is a transgression. These printers, they have the rights to it. Nobody else does. You want to take their work, you are stepping on their territory. You are transgressing this biblical commandment. And what does God say about this biblical commandment? How bad is it? Unfortunately, people do a lot of things wrong. Add it to my list. The Rebbe says, don't be so blasé. Don't be so complacent. Don't think, okay, I'm not perfect. I'm doing something else wrong. Arur Masa Gvul Re'ehu. The verse is saying cursed. There's a curse and there's a banishment. Nidoi is a type of excommunication. So this is like a really strong consequence if you would dare step on these printers' territory. Al Kain, therefore, Ki Yehuda ve'od likra. The Rebbe uses here an expression. This is an expression found in the Talmud, Ki Yehuda ve'od likra, which literally means, it's not literally, it's an idiom. So the expression means, does the verse need to be substantiated with proofs because of the customs of the territories of Yehuda, of Judah? Meaning, the Talmud is discussing a certain issue, and we have verses supporting it. And then we're also bringing in, like on the man level, on the human level, yes, this is how it's done in the territory, in the tribe of Judah, of Yehuda. So the sages are saying, and you need, the verse needs this. Ki Yehuda ve'od likra. The verse needs our help. It's not enough that we can say there's a verse. We also have to add to it with our human hands, like the customs of the lands of Yehuda. But in the end of the day, they do that. So the Alter Rebbe is saying, the verse doesn't need my help. Ki Yehuda ve'od likra. The verse doesn't need my help. It says, Arur Masa Gvul Re'ehu. I think you got the point. The verse does not need my help. But just like in the Talmud, where they do bring in the customs of the land of Yehuda, and they are bringing it in support of the argument being raised with the proof text of the verses, similarly, the Alter is going to add his own statements to the unnecessary, to add strong words, arur, cursed, of the verse. Asina, so I came, or more literally, so I come. Lemiste guda rabba, to place a very strong warning. I'll call him at pisin. On any printers out there, watch yourself. Obviously here, the fear is printers that are haters, printers that are from the enemy camp, printers that would want to take the Tanya, distort it, and print it, piggybacking on all the efforts, financial, governmental, of the original printers. So I'll give you a very strong warning on all the printers. Shelo lahat prints kutresen hanal. Don't do it. Don't you dare print these above-mentioned pamphlets. Lo de atzman, not by yourself. V'lo de gira dilhon, and not by, another agency. People think, oh, yeah, it wasn't me. Someone else did it. I got someone else to do it. The Alter says, don't play games. If you do it, or if you get someone else to do it, or if you let someone else use your printing shop to do it, or if you hire someone else and you walk out of the room when they're doing it, whatever games you're going to play, don't play games. Bottom line, I'm calling it you. Bilti Rishus Hanakuvim Hanal, without the permission of these above mentioned people, the original printers. Meshech Chamesh Shanim Miyom Klos Hadafus. 5 days from when they completed the printing of the Tanya. I said 5 days. 5 years. I said there's a 5-year ban on anyone except the original printers from reprinting the Tanya. And then every time they reprinted it, the original printers, they keep extending the ban and extending the ban and extending the ban. So until today, we still have the same 5-year ban. Of course, not only did the Alter Rebbe put his on, but his sons, the 3 sons of the Alter Rebbe, in the lifetime of the Alter Rebbe's Tanya was reprinted several times with 3 sections. The original printing had the first 2, and then a 3rd section was added in the lifetime of the Alter Rebbe. After the Alter Rebbe's passing, his sons added 2 more sections, and they reissued this ban on now the complete work of all 5 sections. And as I'm saying, that ban has been reinvoked and reinvoked and reinvoked every time they make another printing. So it's still legit until today. So the Rebbe is saying, I'm adding my warning, I'm adding my curses to Torahs. I need to add to Torah. I don't need to add to Torah, but I'm doing my part. And of course, we can imagine that if someone would go against the Alter Rebbe, the power of what the Alter Rebbe is warning here. There's an interesting story. Yeah, I think we have time for it. There's an interesting story just to show the power of the curse, God forbid, of a child, not such a young child, probably a teenager at this point, a boy who couldn't learn, thick-skulled. Torah didn't go in. And it was very shocking because he was the son of the rabbi of the town. And he had other brothers, and they were all brilliant, and the rabbi's brilliant, and probably the Rebbe's even more brilliant. Everyone's brilliant and great scholars. And this boy just couldn't learn, like nothing went in. And one day, a very holy Jew came to this town. And all the townspeople were like, oh, they're going for a blessing. And the rabbi was like, he wasn't into that type of thing. But his wife, being a woman, decided, yes, she's going. And she went to have a blessing for her son who can't learn Torah. And she went to this person who, I'm sorry, I forget who it was. I don't want to misquote, but this was a very holy, renowned Jew. And she came and started crying in front of this great person how her son can't learn Torah. And this person who could see with godly sight said, well, he can't learn Torah properly because he ate not kosher. And that not kosher is stuffing up his mind so he can't learn. So she's even more shocked than she was before. And she goes home and she tells her husband the whole story. He's like, what? Not that I would go to him, but I know he's not a liar, If he says my son ain't not kosher, my son ain't not kosher. And if he's saying because of that not kosher, he can't learn Torah, okay, makes sense. Your food becomes you. His mind got stuffed up by this not kosher and he can't think properly, can't absorb Torah properly. But how in the world could my son not have eaten kosher? He only eats in our home. We don't let our child eat anywhere except in our home. And obviously we have the highest standards of kosher. And again, put it in perspective, in those days, what already could not be kosher, They didn't have processed products, so what could not be kosher? Bottom line, the meat wasn't shechted properly. What could be not kosher? So he says, wow, this is intense. I got to get to the bottom of this. And he calls in his son. And he says to his son, this is already boys probably in his teens, young adults, but he said, did you ever eat outside our house? The boy's like, did I ever eat outside our house? He knows, of course, his parents don't let him. He's an honest child. He's trying to think, we ever eaten outside the house? And he said, once. I remember once eating outside the house. And so I was like, what? Like when? How? What would you have eaten? And he said it was however many years ago. It was Hanukkah. I remember it was like Hanukkah time. It was very, very, very cold. My friends and I, we were coming home from Cheder, from school, and we were so cold, we stopped in the local inn run by a good Jew. And there was a wedding going on, and we were so cold. And he offered us to feed, so that we could eat food from the wedding, and I forgot. And I ate. I'm so sorry. And I said, okay, don't worry, just asking. And I was like, wait a minute. He ate by the local, very reputable, God-fearing innkeeper. I don't want him eating at my house, but I wouldn't be concerned. But he did eat once, so let me figure this out. So he says, I'm going to that innkeeper right now. And he goes to the innkeeper, And he says, I know this might sound strange, but do you remember X number of years ago, Hanukkah having a wedding in your inn? And the man's like, I mean, honestly, I don't remember, but I can look it up in my records. Great. Keeps good records. He opened up his ledger books. How many years ago? Hanukkah? Yeah, there was a wedding here. He didn't ask him if he remembered feeding his son. He said, okay, now what in the world could have been the problem? This is a religious person. This is a all meat kitchen. The only problem he could think of is that there was a problem with the meat, that the meat wasn't kosher. That would be a significant enough problem to harm his son's brain. But this is a very God-fearing innkeeper. Like, what type of shochet, what type of person would he have used to slaughter the meat? So he said, do you have in your records who was the slaughterer for the meat for the wedding? He said, yes, of course, I do. Oh, wow, okay. What was the name of that shochet, of that ritual slaughterer? He told him the name. Now the rabbi's still confused because that's a very reputable slaughterer, a very, very honest shochet who he would trust, very God-fearing. He's like, okay, thank you so much. Now the rabbi of the town goes knocking at someone else's door. The night's getting later. He's on a mission. He's on a quest. And he knocks by the shochet's door. And the shochet sees the rabbi of the town at his door, like, whoa, to what do I owe the privilege? He's getting nervous. Did he do anything wrong? He's a shochet. Did he do something wrong? And the rabbi says, no, don't worry. I just have a personal question. I know this sounds very random, as we would say, but do you remember X number of years ago shechting for a wedding in the local inn, Hanukkah time? And the shochet started crying. He started shaking. He said, yeah, it was me. I did. I'm so, so sorry. And the rabbi was like thinking like, oh my gosh, what did this guy do? It was not kosher and he sold it as kosher? Like he would do something like that? And he said to the shochet, it's okay, calm down. I'm just finding this out for personal information. What happened to the meat? Did you do something that it wasn't kosher? And the shochet's crying more. He said, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I don't know. He said, what didn't you know? The man could barely talk. The man calmed down. He said, I didn't know that the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, whose curse we're discussing, the Alter Rebbe had spoken about what would happen by this wedding. And the rabbi, who again is not a follower of the Alter Rebbe, is saying the Alter Rebbe, he passed away a few years before this wedding. What are you talking? And I was thinking, someone's really crazy here. What are you talking about? He said, I know, but this wedding was a second marriage. And I didn't know. But the Alter Rebbe ruled that the divorce, the original divorce, was invalid. And the Alter Rebbe warned against this person getting remarried. And he said that if he does, it's not going to be a kosher wedding. It's not going to be a kosher marriage. And even the food at the wedding won't be kosher. And he was like, whoa. He said, how do you know this? He said, well, I have a friend who lives in the next town who is a follower of the Alter Rebbe. And he shared this with me afterwards. I didn't know. I honestly didn't know. So now it's already the next town. This is already getting late at night. The rabbi said to this shochet, would you take me to your friend? I know it's late, but would you take me to your friend? He's like, of course. I'm so sorry. 15 million times. They went to the friend. He saw in the friend's house a copy of the Alter Rebbe's verdict about this invalid divorce, literally writing there even to the degree that the food at the wedding, if there would be another wedding, if you're not going to listen to me, if you're not going to understand that this divorce is invalid, even the food would not be kosher. So what exactly was the problem with the meat? The shochet didn't know, but he knew it was not kosher, and it actually wasn't kosher. And it so affected this sensitive child that his brain couldn't learn Torah. So now the rabbi was like, wow, this great tzaddik, this holy Jew that came to our town, he saw, I couldn't see. And the next day he and his wife went to him and asked, well, what can we do? We feel so bad. What could our son do to learn? And he gave them an answer. He said, well, it says you should exile yourself to learn Torah. If he goes and studies Torah in the Holy Land of Israel, which would mean a lot of physical hardships for him instead of studying Torah in the comfort of his home, that deprivation will clean out his mind and he'll be able to learn and succeed in Torah, which is what happened. But I'm bringing it in because I want you to understand Then when the Alter Rebbe said, the verse says curse, it means it. There's a curse, there's a form of excommunication, and not that the verse needs my help, but I'm adding my strong warning for you. This was a very, very powerful deterrent. And we see it worked. Because even though these same haters who hand copied mistakes and even like printed their hand copied versions to try to spread and spread and spread and discredit and discredit and discredit, and they did many other things to try to discredit the Alter Rebbe, and they ultimately got him 2 years later in jail. With jail doesn't mean like, American jail cell. It meant like losing his life, intense prison. But still, they never dared to try to reprint this printed Tanya in a way that would be very easy and accessible to them with their deliberate errors. What the Rebbe said scared them off. They were like, we can't start. We can't touch this fire. And therefore, nobody tried to do what the Alter Rebbe was very strongly warning them not to do. And of course, just like we saw earlier, if you remember in the previous paragraph where the Alter Rebbe was asking the elders of the town to teach the younger people or the confused people. You could be young in years, you could be young in knowledge. And the Rebbe said, a warning if you don't, and strong blessings if you do. May your Einei Shneim Hashem. God will illuminate both of your eyes. So also here, the Rebbe is giving a very strong warning. He knows this is very realistic, and he's really being firm here, and his words were firm enough that they worked. At the same time, the Rebbe, of course, always wants to conclude with good, which is the approach that we should always end with positive. So the Rebbe continues and says, U'lishonim yun am, and to those who listen, it will be sweet. Meaning, if you are a printer who is being pressured, who is being tempted, who is being bribed, who is being coerced to step on the printer's territory, to print it with the deliberate mistakes, you're tempted and you're listening to me. Maybe you're scared and that's why you're listening, but you're listening. I'm giving you my tremendous blessings. V'tavo birchas toiv, and the blessings of good to you will come. Ko divrei hamelake lukutei amarim hanal. These are the words of the compiler of this work. Remember, not the author. Spent 20 years on it, but the compiler of this collection of works of Likutei Amarim, which is the official title. We call it Tanya. The Alter Rebbe calls it Likutei Amarim. Next class, we'll find out why we call it Tanya. But just also to mention this point, the same way I spoke of the curse of the Alter Rebbe and its power, we also have many stories of the blessings of the Alter Rebbe and their power. A very famous, powerful one that has a very strong lesson for us is actually when the Alter Rebbe 2 years later was arrested and spent 53 days in this horrific fortress of prison for the 53 chapters of Tanya, as we discussed in the beginning of this introduction. The fortress was a fortress on an island. Actually, until this day, it's very interesting. They have a wax museum in the fortress, which now you can tour. And they have their wax images of their most famous inmates. And the Alter Rebbe is there. You see the Alter Rebbe with the Tsar, because the Tsar came in disguise to talk to the Alter Rebbe. And they know this, and they actually have wax figurines of the Alter Rebbe and the Tsar. So this is a fortress island. And when he was taken for interrogation, which they usually interrogate at night because the person's more confused and tired and therefore will slip up more, he was transported by boat from the island fortress to the land where the interrogators were. And one such night, actually connecting, wow, I cannot say I planned this because I didn't plan the story I said at the beginning of the class, and I didn't plan to say this one either, but God works his ways, beginnings and ends are connected. So in the beginning of class, I opened up with a story about my father, whose yahrzeit is tonight, and Kiddush Levana. I'm going to now conclude with the Alter Rebbe and a story about Kiddush Levana. So the Alter Rebbe is going by boat. It's middle of the night. He sees the moon. He knows it's time to make the blessing on the moon, to sanctify the moon. And he knows you can't do that when you're moving, like in a boat. So he says to the captain, could you do me a favor and stop the boat for a minute? I want to say a prayer. Captain looked at him like, are you crazy? You're the prisoner. I'm the captain of the boat. And he continued moving the boat, of course. And then the boat suddenly stopped. The captain was not so slow. He got the point. Then the boat started again. And the Alter Rebbe went over to the captain and said, could you do me a favor and stop the boat? I want to say this prayer. And now the captain understood who he was dealing with, and he said, I'll be very happy to, on condition that you give me a blessing, that I will rise in the ranks, get a very high position. I will have much wealth, health, longevity, and this blessing will be for me and my descendants. And the Alter Rebbe said, deal. And the captain said, I'd like that in writing. No problem. And the Alter Rebbe wrote out all these blessings to this very blessed person. He won the jackpot, and he stopped the boat. And the Alter Rebbe said the prayer, and then the boat continued. And of course, he's a prisoner, and he goes to be interrogated. And of course, the question on that is like, what did he do that for? Why didn't he just stop the boat himself like he did? And of course, God wants us to serve him within nature. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe did not want to make a miracle, and through a miracle, perform this commandment properly. He wanted to be through natural. So he'd rather shower all these blessings on this seemingly undeserving person, but he'll shower him all these blessings so he can do a commandment as God wants it, and not do the commandment through a miracle. Because God doesn't want us to break nature. He wants us to do it through nature, especially when we're serving him in the commandments. How do we know the story? We know the story because, I don't remember, I think it was like 2 generations later, a Lubavitcher Chassid was by some very rich, influential magnate's home, and he saw in this, very fancy, luxurious salon room, framed with this, very, very important looking frame, this document. And he got the story from the grandson of this captain. So all the blessings were fulfilled. So the warnings are fulfilled, the blessings are fulfilled, and it worked. It says from 5 years from the date the Tanya was printed. The Alter Rebbe really wanted the Tanya to be printed for his Rebbe's day of passing, Yartzeit, his Stalkos. His Rebbe was the Maggid of Mezrich, and the Maggid of Mezrich passed away on the 19th of Kislev, Yotes Kislev. And the Alter Rebbe really wanted, in honor of this holy day of his Rebbe's passing, that should be the date of the printing of the Tanya. But it wasn't. They tried, but it wasn't finished until the 20th of Kislev, the next day. When the Alter Rebbe found this out, he really took it to heart, the 20th of Kislev, the 20th of Kislev, the 20th of Kislev. You'd be like, okay, we understand you wanted the 19th, but what's the big deal? But the Hasidim understood the big deal 2 years later, when the Alter Rebbe was imprisoned, because he was released from the Russians on the 19th of Kislev. But then he had to spend a few hours of what he calls the most difficult torture in the house of an enemy of the Hasidic movement, a different Jew who was badgering him with questions and doing many, many things to make him so uncomfortable. And the followers, the Hasidim of the Rebbe, only realized where he was and rescued him after nightfall. So he was really released from prison, from the real prison, the 20th of Kislev, the day that the Tanya was actually printed. So with that, we conclude. I'm sorry I went a few minutes over, but I definitely wanted to finish today. And we are starting next week, chapter 1 of Tanya. Very, very, very exciting. Does someone have something?